Please drive me to the hospital. Something is wrong." He paused, then laughed softly. "Dad, just call an Uber. My wife and I are walking the dog." An hour later, I was alone in a hospital bed signing emergency surgery papers with trembling hands. 5 days passed without one call. Then he finally rang. "Dad," he said casually, "you still have that savings account, right?" I froze because my answer was already waiting. "Thank you so much for being here with me today. It truly means the world. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me what city or country are you watching from. I love knowing who's on this journey with me." A small note. This story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to actual names or places is purely coincidental, but the heart of the message is something I hope stays with you. It was a Wednesday evening, the 15th of October, and the Ohio sky had already gone dark by 8:30. I remember because I'd just checked the clock above the stove when the first cramp hit me, that old sunburst clock Margaret picked out at a yard sale back in 1987, the one I keep meaning to replace and never do. 8:32, it said. And then my knees nearly went out from under me. I grabbed the edge of the kitchen sink with both hands. The plate I'd been rinsing slid sideways and clattered against the basin, and I stood there bent over, jaw locked, breathing through my nose the way my late wife used to tell me to breathe when something hurt. Slow in. Slow out. Give it a minute, Arthur. It'll pass. For 35 years, I worked the floor at Midwest Steelworks welding beams in 100-degree heat, lifting steel that would have broken a younger man in half. I knew pain. I had a high threshold for it, and a low tolerance for making a scene. So I stood at that sink and waited for the cramp to ease up, fully expecting it to behave like every other ache that comes with being 72 years old in a body that's logged a lot of hard miles. It didn't ease up. It got worse. By 8:45, I was sitting at the kitchen table with sweat along my hairline and a deep, pulsing pressure in my lower right side that had no interest in going away. I pressed my palm flat against my abdomen and felt something that made the hair on my arms stand up, not just pain, but wrongness. The particular wrongness of a body trying to tell you something important. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Daniel's name, my son. 38 years old, lives about 12 minutes across town, in that big house on Clover Ridge Drive, the one I helped him put a down payment on 6 years ago. I don't call him often. The conversations between us had gotten shorter and thinner over the years, like a river going dry in a long summer. But this was not a night for pride. This was a night when a man calls his son. The line rang 3 times. He picked up on the 4th. "Hey, Dad." Easy, relaxed. I could hear the television going in the background, something with a lot of music. "Daniel." I kept my voice flat and steady, the way I used to speak to younger guys on the factory floor when something needed handling right now. "I need you to drive me to the hospital. I've got a bad pain in my right side lower abdomen. It started about 20 minutes ago, and it's not letting up. I don't think I should get behind the wheel." A pause, not a long one. 2 seconds, maybe 3. But something in those 2 seconds felt like a door closing somewhere. Dad, can't you just call a cab? Emily and I are out right now. We're at Riverside Park, walking Cooper." My grip tightened on the phone until my knuckles ached. I told myself I'd misheard him. The pain was doing something to my ears. "Say that again. Cooper needs his walk, Dad. You know how he gets when we skip it. Just pull up Uber, it's real easy. I can talk you through it if you need help with the app." The kitchen felt like it tilted. I pressed my free hand flat against the table, cool laminate, solid and ordinary, just to feel something real. "Daniel." My voice dropped to something quieter and steadier than I felt. "I'm in pain. I think something might be seriously wrong with me. It's probably just indigestion. You always worry too much about this stuff." In the background, I heard Emily's voice saying something light and laughing, and Daniel chuckled softly at whatever it was. Then he came back to me. "Look, we planned this walk since last week. Cooper's been cooped up all day, and we really needed to get out. You'll be fine. Uber's fast. Seriously, just open the app. We planned this since last week." I don't know exactly what I said after that. Something short. Something that ended the call. Because the next thing I clearly remember is sitting at that kitchen table with the phone face down in front of me, and my hand pressed hard against my right side, and the maple tree outside scratching its branches against the window like it was trying to get in. My fingers were trembling when I opened the Uber app. Not from the pain, though the pain was bad and getting worse. They were trembling because something in me, some part that had spent 72 years believing the people you love will show up when it counts, had just taken a hit it wasn't going to recover from easily. The driver arrived in 11 minutes. Young guy, maybe 25, baseball cap, pine air freshener swinging from the mirror. He took one look at me, lowering myself into the back seat slowly, carefully, one hand gripping the doorframe, and his easy expression shifted into something more careful. "You doing okay back there, sir?" "Cedar Falls General," I said. "Emergency entrance, please move." He moved. No more questions. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes and listened to Cedar Falls slide past outside the window. Familiar streets, familiar stoplights. The town where I'd raised my boy poured concrete for my driveway, buried my wife. The town where, on a Wednesday night in October, a 72-year-old man was riding to the emergency room alone because his son was busy walking the dog. The cramp hit again, harder, deeper, radiating down toward my hip, and I pressed my fist against my side and breathed through it. Slow in, slow out. Outside, the October dark rolled past, and the cold stone that had settled in my chest. When Daniel said we planned this since last week, when I sat there without moving, heavy and patient, like it knew it had all the time in the world. The Uber pulled up to Cedar Falls General at 9:13 that evening, and the automatic doors of the emergency entrance slid open before I'd even finished straightening up from the back seat. I remember the time because there was a clock mounted just inside the entrance, big round institutional, and I fixed on it the way a drowning man fixes on something solid. 9:13, October 15th, Wednesday. The ER smelled the way all hospitals smell, antiseptic and floor wax, and something faintly sweet underneath, like someone had tried to mask the truth of the place with air freshener and hadn't quite managed it. The fluorescent lights overhead were cold and relentless. A wall-mounted television in the corner played cable news with the volume turned down to almost nothing. Nobody was watching. I pushed through to the intake window. The woman behind the desk looked up from her computer, young, dark-haired, with the practiced, steady expression of someone who'd seen everything come through those doors and learned not to flinch. "Sir, what brings you in tonight?" "Pain," I said. "Right side lower abdomen, sharp and spreading. Been going on close to an hour now. Scale of 1 to 10. I thought about it honestly. I've never been one to exaggerate. 7, pushing 8. Nausea fever, some nausea. No fever that I know of. I didn't check before I left. She was already typing. She slid a clipboard through the gap in the window, standard intake form boxes, to fill lines to sign. At the top of the second page was a printed field that read, "Emergency contact, name and relationship." I stared at that line for a moment longer than I needed to. Then I wrote Daniel's name and number. Force of habit. 20 years of it. I found a chair along the wall and sat down with the clipboard balanced on my knee. The waiting room was half full on a Wednesday night. Across from me, a young mother was holding a toddler against her shoulder, the child fussing softly and pulling at her hair. 2 seats down, an elderly couple sat close together, the woman's head resting on the man's shoulder. His hand folded over hers on the armrest, his thumb moving back and forth in a slow, steady rhythm. A teenage boy in a soccer uniform had his leg propped up on the chair beside him, an ice pack on his ankle. his father leaning in close and talking to him in a low voice. Everyone had someone. I filled out the form. I kept my eyes off the elderly couple. I kept my handwriting steady. And when I handed the clipboard back through the window, I did not look at the emergency contact line again. They called me back within 20 minutes. A nurse came to the waiting room door and read my name off a chart, Mr. Hayes, and I followed her through into the Bay Area. Her name badge said Betty. She had gray-streaked hair pulled back tight, and the kind of unhurried efficiency that comes from 20-plus years of doing something well. She helped me up onto the narrow bed, checked my blood pressure, pressed cool fingers to my wrist to check my pulse, made notes on her clipboard. "Your temperature's a little elevated," she said, reading the thermometer. 99.8. "Any history of appendix trouble?" "No," I said. "Never had a problem with it before." Pain started high and moved lower right. She pressed her fingertips carefully along my side, and when she hit the spot, the exact center of the wrongness, I sucked air through my teeth so hard it made a sound. "Right there," I managed. Betty's pen moved faster. "Doctor'll be right in. Try to stay as still as you can." She pulled the curtain and left me alone. I lay on that narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Through the thin curtain, I could hear the ER moving around me, the rattle of a gurney, the low murmur of voices, a phone ringing twice and cutting off. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. No messages, no missed calls, no notifications of any kind. I put the phone back in my pocket and left it there. Dr. Fletcher arrived within 15 minutes, a tall woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the measured, deliberate calm of someone who'd delivered hard news many times and understood that how you said a thing mattered as much as what you said. She introduced herself, pressed her hands along my abdomen with clinical precision, and watched my face when she reached the lower right quadrant. The pain spiked sharp and bright, and I gripped the side rail of the bed hard enough to whiten my knuckles. "Mr. Hayes," she said, straightening up and folding her hands in front of her, "your blood work shows a significantly elevated white cell count, and combined with the location and character of your pain, we're looking at acute appendicitis. Your appendix needs to come out tonight. If we wait, we risk rupture, and a ruptured appendix becomes a life-threatening emergency very quickly." "How long is the surgery?" My voice came out level, steady. I was grateful for 35 years of keeping it together on a factory floor. "Laparoscopic appendectomy. We make 3 small incisions about the diameter of a pencil and use a tiny camera to remove the appendix. Under normal circumstances, the procedure takes 45 minutes to an hour. You'll be under general anesthesia. Recovery here is typically 2 to 3 days, then 2 weeks of rest at home." She held my gaze. "It's one of the most common procedures we perform. The risk is low, but we do need to move now." "Then let's move," I said. She produced the consent form, standard document, risks and benefits in small printed type A signature line at the bottom. I read every word of it the way I'd always read every contract and every work order in 35 years of taking jobs seriously. Then I signed my name in full, Arthur J. Hayes. Dr. Fletcher took the form and tucked it under her arm. "Is there family we should contact? Someone who can be here when you come out of anesthesia?" The question landed quietly. I thought about Daniel's voice on the phone, easy, and relaxed, the television going in the background, Emily laughing at something just off the line. I thought about the clock above my kitchen stove. 8:32. "No," I said. "There's no one." Dr. Fletcher held my gaze for just a beat longer than she needed to, not pity, not judgment. Just the simple, honest acknowledgement of someone who understood the weight those 3 words carried. Then she gave a small, professional nod and moved toward the curtain. Nurse Betty came back a few minutes later to fit me with an IV. The needle went in smooth, and she taped down the line with practiced hands, talking quietly about what to expect, the anesthesia, the bright lights of the OR, the grogginess when I came around. "Mr. Hayes," she said, not looking up from her work. Your son, is he on his way? My throat went tight. I looked at the IV line running from the back of my hand, up to the clear bag on the pole beside the bed. Such a small, ordinary thing to be tethered to in a moment like this. He's busy, I said. Betty smoothed the tape down one last time, then gave my forearm a brief practiced pat. You're in good hands here. I promise. They came for me 10 minutes later. 2 orderlies in blue scrubs guided my gurney out through the curtain and into the long corridor leading to the operating rooms. The ceiling tiles moved past overhead one after another, steady, rhythmic, indifferent. The fluorescent lights hummed. I kept my eyes open. Somewhere behind me, the ER went on doing what it always did. And somewhere across town in the dark, Daniel and Emily were walking Cooper home through Riverside Park, the dog trotting happily at the end of his leash, the night air cool and clean against their faces. And I was here. I closed my eyes just as the OR doors swung open ahead of me. The last thing I heard was the soft, mechanical hiss of the anesthesia machine, beginning to breathe. The first thing I was aware of was the ceiling. White acoustic tiles, water stain in the corner, shaped like a lopsided star. A fluorescent tube humming slightly off pitch from the others. It was early morning. I could tell by the quality of the light coming through the narrow window above the radiator, that thin gray-blue light that belongs only to the hours just after dawn. The clock on the wall read 6:04 Thursday, October 16th. I'd made it through the night. My mouth tasted like copper and old medicine. My right side ached with a deep, bruised feeling soreness that was completely different from the sharp, twisting agony of the night before. This was the honest ache of a body that had been cut into and stitched back together while I was somewhere far away and didn't feel a thing. I moved my fingers first, then my toes, then tried to shift my legs, and the pull of the incision sites made me wince and go still. Mr. Hayes? Nurse Betty appeared in the doorway, chart in hand, moving with the same unhurried efficiency I remembered from the night before. Good morning. How are we feeling? Like someone took a pair of scissors to my insides, I said. My voice came out rough and dry as gravel, which I suppose is accurate. Betty actually smiled at that, a real one, quick and genuine. That's a fair description. She came to the bedside, checked my IV line, pressed 2 fingers to my wrist. Pain level, 4, maybe 5, manageable, good. That's right where we want you. She made a note on the chart, then looked up. Dr. Fletcher will be in on rounds in about an hour. Everything came through clean last night. Your appendix is out, no rupture, no complications. You did well. Is that right? I stared at the ceiling. I wasn't thinking about my appendix. I was thinking about whether there were any notifications on my phone, which was sitting face up on the bedside table, not 8 inches from my right hand, and whether I was brave enough to look at it. I looked at it. No messages, no missed calls. The screen went dark again, and I set it back down. Betty finished her notes and tucked the chart under her arm. She glanced toward the door, then back at me, and something shifted in her expression, just slightly, just enough to tell me she was about to say something that wasn't strictly medical. Mr. Hayes, she said, keeping her voice easy and conversational. Your son, is he on his way in this morning? My throat closed up like a fist had grabbed it from the inside. I lay there looking at the ceiling with its lopsided water stain, and I thought about what the true answer to that question was. I thought about Riverside Park, and a golden retriever named Cooper, and a walk that had been planned since last week. I thought about how to say what I knew without saying what I knew, because if I said it out loud, if I actually put words to it, it would stop being a thing I could tell myself might still have an explanation, and start being a thing that simply was. He's busy, I said. Work stuff, you know how it is. Betty nodded like that was the most natural thing in the world. Of course. Well, you just rest. You've got the call button right there if you need anything. She was almost to the door when I heard footsteps in the hallway, a familiar, slightly heavy-footed tread that I recognized before the face appeared. Jim Harmon pushed through the doorway at 6:17 in the morning with a paper bag from Miller's Bakery on the corner of 4th and Elm, and a large coffee in each hand, and the sight of him standing there in his barn jacket, with flour dust on the bag, and his silver hair sticking up on one side from sleeping on it. Wrong had hit me somewhere behind the sternum like a slow, warm collision. Jim Harmon had lived next door to me for 22 years. He was 68, a retired high school shop teacher widower like me, and the kind of man who showed up without being asked, because he understood that sometimes being asked was the hardest part. "Lord Almighty Art," he said, taking in the hospital bed and the IV pole and the whole sorry picture of me. "You look like something the cat dragged in." "Good morning to you too, Jim." He set both coffees on the bedside table, dropped the bakery bag on my blanket, and pulled the visitor's chair close with his foot. "I got your text last night, the one you sent before they took you back. I would have come then, but they said no visitors during surgery." He sat down and fixed me with a look that was equal parts concern and barely contained exasperation. "Why didn't you call me first, you stubborn old fool, before the Uber, before all of it?" My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the incision sites. I opened my mouth, closed it again, and looked at the bag from Miller's Bakery. "I called Daniel," I said. Jim's jaw tightened. One small muscle jumped along his cheekbone. He didn't ask what Daniel had said. He just reached into the bag, pulled out a blueberry muffin, and set it on the tray table in front of me with the quiet deliberateness of a man choosing his next words very carefully. "Eat something," he said. "You've been on an empty stomach since yesterday. Jim, eat first, talk after." I picked up the muffin. My hands felt unsteady and thin, the hands of a man who'd just had surgery and not slept enough and was holding himself together with whatever was left after a long night of being completely alone. I took a bite. It was still warm from the oven. The kindness of it, the sheer uncomplicated kindness of a warm muffin brought by someone who drove across town at 6 in the morning because he got a text and came anyway, made my eyes go hot and prickly in a way I was not prepared for. I pressed my lips together hard and looked at the window and blinked until the feeling passed. "You didn't have to come," I managed when I trusted my voice again. "No," Jim agreed, wrapping both hands around his coffee cup. "I didn't." He let that sit there between us for a moment, solid and plain as a stone. Then he added, "Drink your coffee before it gets cold." I had to argue with the woman at the nurse's station for 10 minutes to get it past the desk. I picked up the cup. Outside the window, Cedar Falls was waking up under an overcast October sky, gray and low, and going nowhere in a hurry. I thought about Nurse Betty's question. I thought about the word busy and how many years I'd been using it to cover for things I didn't know how to name. "Thank you," I said. Just that. 2 words. But Jim heard everything in them that I couldn't say out loud, because he was the kind of man who listened to what people didn't say just as carefully as what they did. He raised his coffee cup half an inch in a small, quiet toast. "Anytime, Art," he said, "anytime." Jim left around 10:30, once he'd seen me eat both the muffin and half a container of the hospital oatmeal that a orderly brought in at 8, and made sure I knew how to use the call button, and extracted a promise that I would actually use it if I needed something, instead of lying there being stoic about it. He had a doctor's appointment of his own at 11 that he'd been putting off for 3 weeks, and I told him to go, and he went, but only after standing in the doorway for a moment, with his hand on the frame, looking at me with that careful, measuring look of his. "I'll come back this afternoon," he said. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't." He pulled his jacket on. "Call me if anything changes." The door swung shut behind him, and the room went quiet. That particular kind of hospital quiet that has sounds in it. The hum of the ventilation, the distant squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. Someone's television down the hall playing a morning talk show at low volume. But underneath all of it, a core of stillness that presses in close. I lay there for a while just breathing, in and out. The soreness in my right side had settled into something dull and constant that I could work around. The way you learn to work around any chronic discomfort, once you establish that it isn't going to kill you today. I shifted the pillow behind my head, looked at the gray October light coming through the window. My phone was on the bedside table. It had been on the bedside table all morning. I had looked at it approximately every 20 minutes since I woke up, and every time the screen showed me the same thing, nothing. No calls, no texts, not even an automated message from the hospital billing system. At 11:47 that morning, I picked it up. I told myself I was going to check the weather. That is what I told myself. Instead, my thumb moved to Facebook, without my brain's full participation, the way hands do things they've done 1,000 times before. I'd had a Facebook account for about 4 years. Daniel set it up for me one Sunday afternoon when he came over for dinner. Back when Sunday dinners were still a thing that happened. I mostly used it to look at pictures of other people's grandchildren and occasionally read articles about baseball. Daniel's page loaded near the top of my feed. The post had gone up at 9:47 the previous evening, 9:47 p.m. October 15th. I had to read that timestamp twice. Then I had to set the phone down on my chest and stare at the ceiling for a moment, because 9:47 p.m. on October 15th was approximately the time that Dr. Fletcher and her team were somewhere in this very building working on my insides. I picked the phone back up. The photo was bright and sunlit and full of easy happiness. Daniel and Emily were sitting on the grass at Riverside Park. I recognized the pavilion in the background, the old stone one near the duck pond. Both of them were smiling, the wide, uncomplicated smiles of people having exactly the kind of evening they wanted to be having. Between them, sprawled out on the grass with his tongue lolling and his tail a golden blur, was Cooper, their 3-year-old golden retriever, who, according to my son, needed his walk so badly that it couldn't be interrupted for any reason. The caption read, "Perfect family day with our baby." Below that, a row of small heart symbols. I scrolled down through the comments. 153 of them. People I didn't know saying things like, "So adorable," and "Cooper is everything," and "You two are the best dog parents." Daniel had replied to several of them with little laughing faces, and "Thank you so much." Emily had added a comment of her own. "My whole heart right here." I read that caption again. "Perfect family day. My whole heart right here." I put the phone face down on the blanket. I pressed both hands flat against my thighs and concentrated on breathing. Slow, steady, the way Margaret taught me, the way I'd been doing since the night before when everything started going sideways. Here was what I was thinking. I was thinking about 9:47 p.m. October 15th. I was thinking about the consent form I'd signed alone with a ballpoint pen that the nurse had handed me because there was nobody else to hold my hand while I did it. I was thinking about the field on that form that said emergency contact and the name I'd written there out of 20 years of habit, and how that name had not produced a single phone call or text message in the 16 hours since I'd written it. I was thinking about how a man could take a photograph of his dog and post it to the internet at 9:47 at night and get 153 comments and not find 60 seconds in that same evening to pick up a phone and call his father. My eyes burned. Not from crying, I hadn't cried yet, and I wasn't going to not here, not in this room with its humming ventilation and its morning talk shows down the hall. They burned the way eyes burn when something true and terrible is becoming impossible to look away from. I turned my head toward the window. Outside, Cedar Falls sat under its flat gray October sky, going about the business of a Thursday morning. Cars in the parking lot below. A woman in a red coat walking fast with her head down. 2 pigeons on the ledge of the building across the way doing whatever pigeons do. An ordinary day out there, a completely ordinary Thursday. I reached over and placed my phone in the drawer of the bedside table, closed it, pressed my hand flat against the drawer for a moment, as if I could hold something inside it. Then I lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling. The lopsided water stain was still there, shaped like a star that hadn't quite made it. I looked at that stain for a long time, and something in the back of my mind, quiet, methodical, the part of me that had spent 35 years solving problems on a factory floor, began to turn over a question that I'd been avoiding for much longer than just the past 16 hours. Not a question about Daniel. Not about last night or Riverside Park or a dog named Cooper. A question that went back much further than that. A question about 20 years of phone calls and what they had and hadn't contained. A question I wasn't ready to answer yet, but that had started asking itself whether I was ready or not. And somewhere in the back of that question, quiet as a door cracking open, in an empty house, was the beginning of a decision. The pain medication wore off sometime around midnight, and I lay in the dark of my hospital room with my eyes open and the ceiling above me and 35 years of arithmetic running through my head. It was the early hours of Friday, October 17th, or maybe still the 16th. I'd lost track of exactly where one day ended and the other began. The nurse had come in at 11 to check my vitals and adjust something on the IV line, and after she left the room, had gone back to that particular hospital darkness, not fully dark, never fully dark, always that faint seepage of light from under the door, and the green glow of the monitor beside the bed. The pain in my right side had softened to a persistent nagging ache that I could breathe through if I was careful about it. I'd checked my phone at 11:15. No messages, no missed calls. I put it back in the drawer and didn't touch it again. Instead, I lay there in the greenish dark, and I started doing what I'd always done when I couldn't sleep and needed something to occupy my mind. I started running numbers. It was an old habit from the factory floor, from 35 years of calculating load tolerances and weld specifications and material costs. Numbers were clean. Numbers were honest. Numbers didn't soften anything or dress it up or tell you what you wanted to hear. So I started from the beginning, the car. Daniel was 23 years old, fresh out of Ohio State, with his accounting degree and his first real job at Hartwell Financial downtown. He'd come over on a Saturday morning. I could still see him sitting at my kitchen table just the way he used to sit when he was a teenager, with his elbows on the table and his hands wrapped around a coffee mug, and he'd explained about the commute, about 3 bus transfers, about how unreliable the schedule was. "Dad, I need a car," he'd said. "I've saved up $2,000, but I need at least 8 for something decent. I hate to ask, but..." "Don't hate to ask," I'd told him. "You're my son." I'd given him $6,000. I had to move money from the account I kept separate, the one Margaret and I had started together, back when we used to call it the Rainy Day Fund. He'd thanked me with a hug that lasted about 3 seconds, and a promise that he'd pay me back as soon as he got on his feet. That was 15 years ago. Not a single dollar had come back. College. That was before the car, back when Daniel was 18 and heading to Ohio State, and the tuition bill arrived like a physical blow to the chest. I remembered standing at the kitchen counter opening that first envelope, and Margaret coming up behind me and putting her hand on my shoulder and saying, "We'll figure it out, Arthur. We always do." And we did figure it out. I picked up overtime shifts for 2 years straight, came home so tired some nights that I sat down on the back porch steps and couldn't move for 20 minutes. Just sat there in my work clothes smelling like welding smoke and letting the night air put me back together. $25,000 over 4 years, every semester on time. Daniel graduated with a 3.2 and a job offer, and never once mentioned the tuition. Not as a debt, not as a gift, not as anything. It simply ceased to exist once it was paid. The wedding. God, the wedding. Emily had wanted something beautiful, and she was right to want it. Every girl should have a beautiful wedding. I don't begrudge her that. but beautiful in Lakeview County in the 21st century, meant the Whitmore Event Center, and a live band, and a photographer who charged $1,800 just to show up, and $300 a plate for 120 guests. I'd sat across from Daniel at this very same kitchen table 3 years after the car loan that never got repaid, and listened to him explain the numbers with the careful, neutral tone of a man who works in finance and knows how to present uncomfortable figures. "Emily's parents are covering half," he'd said, "but our half comes out to about 40,000, and we just don't have that kind of liquidity right now." Liquidity. My son, the accountant, talking to his welder father about liquidity. I'd taken out a personal loan, paid it off over 3 years. Never mentioned it to Daniel or Emily. $40,000 for a single Saturday in September, and the thank you card they sent afterward had a printed message inside with their signatures at the bottom, like something you'd send to a coworker who brought a casserole to the office potluck. And then the house. The house was the one that had kept me awake on more than one night before this particular night. 6 years ago, Daniel and Emily had found a place on Clover Ridge Drive. 3 bedrooms, 2-car garage, big backyard, and the down payment was $90,000. 90. Daniel had called me on a Sunday evening, and I could hear in his voice that he'd rehearsed the conversation, that he and Emily had probably talked through how to present it, what words to use. "Dad, we found our forever home," he'd said. "But we're short on the down payment. We have 30 saved. We need 90. I know it's a lot, and I wouldn't ask if—" "How much are you short?" I'd cut in. 60,000. I'd closed my eyes. $60,000 was the better part of everything I had in savings. It was 35 years of overtime shifts and skipped vacations and driving the same truck for 11 years, because a new one felt like an unnecessary expense. It was Margaret's rainy day fund grown slowly and carefully over decades. "All right," I'd said. "I'll get you the money." Daniel's voice had cracked slightly. "Dad, thank you. I promise we'll pay you back. Every dollar. 6 years, not a dollar, not a mention." I lay in the hospital bed, in the dark of the early morning of October 17th, and I added it all up one more time slowly and carefully, the way I used to check my weld specifications before signing off on them. 8,000, plus 25,000, plus 40,000, plus 60,000, $133,000. I said that number quietly, in the dark. $133,000. I held it in my mind, the way you hold something that's heavier than it looks, feeling the full weight of it. And here is what I want to say clearly, because I think it matters. I did not give that money to Daniel because I expected to be paid back. I gave it because he was my son, and he needed it, and I had it, and that was what you did. That was what a father did. I believed that with everything I had. What broke something loose in me that night, what made my eyes go hot and raw in the greenish dark of that hospital room, was not the money. It was the realization of what the money had bought. It had bought a car that Daniel drove for 8 years, without once saying thank you, not really. It had bought a degree that he cashed in for a career and never looked back. It had bought a wedding that Emily's mother referenced more than Daniel ever did. It had bought a house where right now, while I lay in a hospital bed, recovering from emergency surgery, I'd had alone my son and his wife were sleeping soundly, with their dog at the foot of the bed. And somewhere in that accounting, somewhere in 35 years of overtime and careful saving and saying yes every single time my son said he needed something, I had made a terrible miscalculation. I had confused giving with connecting. I had handed over money and called it love, and somewhere along the way, Daniel had stopped being able to tell the difference. Or maybe he'd never learned it in the first place. My eyes burned hot and fierce, and this time I let them. There in the dark, in that hospital room where nobody would see, I let my eyes fill up and spill over 2 thin lines of heat running down into my gray hair, and I did not wipe them away. I just lay there and felt the full weight of $133,000 and 35 years and a son who had not called. The monitor beside the bed beeped its steady, patient rhythm. Outside, Cedar Falls slept, and something in me, something quiet and cold and deliberate, began to wake up. They discharged me on the morning of Friday, October 17th, 2 days after the surgery. Dr. Fletcher came in on her morning rounds at 7:15, pressed carefully along my incision sites, asked me to rate my pain, reviewed my blood work one final time, and told me I was healing exactly as expected. "No heavy lifting for 3 weeks," she said, making notes on her tablet. "No driving for at least 5 days. The anesthesia and pain medication affect your reaction time longer than people realize. Short walks are good longer ones when you feel ready. Come back in 2 weeks for a follow-up." She looked up at me over her reading glasses. "Do you have someone who can drive you home and stay with you for the first day or two?" "My neighbor," I said. "Jim Harmon. He's already on his way." Dr. Fletcher nodded, made one final note, and shook my hand with the firm professional grip of someone who had done good work and knew it. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Hayes." Jim arrived at 8:30 with his truck idling in the patient pickup lane and a thermos of coffee on the passenger seat. He helped me down from the curb and into the truck without making a production of it, just one hand on my elbow, steady and matter-of-fact, the way he did everything. "How are you feeling?" he asked, pulling out of the hospital lot. "Like I got cut open and put back together," I said, which is accurate. "You want to stop anywhere on the way home?" "No, I just want to sit in my own chair." Jim nodded and kept driving. We went through downtown Cedar Falls, past the hardware store, past Miller's Bakery, where he'd gotten the muffins 2 days ago, past the old Midwest Steelworks building, on the edge of the industrial district, the smokestack cold, now the parking lot empty on a Friday morning. I watched it go by and felt the particular mix of pride and ache that old men feel when they look at the places where they spent the best decades of their strength. Jim pulled into my driveway at 9:05 and put the truck in park. "You want company today?" he asked. "I don't have anything that can't wait." "I'm all right, Jim." I opened the door and climbed down carefully, one hand on the frame. "But I appreciate it. Call me if you need anything." He waited until I had my key in the front door before he backed out. The house was cool and quiet inside. I'd forgotten to leave the heat on when the ambulance came 2 nights ago, and the October chill had settled into the rooms, the way it does when a house has been empty. I turned the thermostat up to 68, hung my jacket on the hook by the door, and lowered myself into the armchair in the living room, with the careful, measured movements of a man who's been told not to strain anything. The house looked exactly the way I'd left it Wednesday evening. Plate drying in the rack by the sink. A book open face down on the side table. The remote on the arm of the couch. Ordinary. Unchanged. As if nothing had happened. My phone showed no messages from Daniel. I set it face down on the side table and covered it with the book. Jim came back that afternoon with a container of chicken soup from the diner on Route 9. The kind that comes in the big white quart containers with the plastic lid. He set it on the stove, found a bowl in my cabinet, and ladled some out without asking if I wanted any. "Eat," he said, putting it on the table in front of me. "Doctor said you need protein." "Jim, you don't have to." "Arthur." He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "Stop finishing that sentence. I've been your neighbor for 22 years. Let me bring you some soup." Something in my throat tightened painfully. I picked up the spoon. We sat there at my kitchen table for the better part of an hour. Jim drinking coffee, me eating soup, the two of us talking about nothing in particular. The gutters on his garage that needed cleaning before the first hard freeze. The new traffic light they'd put in at the intersection of 5th and Maple that nobody had asked for. Whether the Browns had any realistic shot at the playoffs this year, which we both agreed they did not. We did not talk about Daniel. Jim came back the next morning with eggs and toast, and the morning after that with a bag of groceries, milk bread, some canned soup, a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store still warm in its plastic container. Each time he knocked, came in, made sure I'd eaten, and left without overstaying his welcome. Each time he did not mention Daniel. He didn't have to. The shape of Daniel's absence was in the room every time Jim walked in with food that should have been coming from someone else. Saturday passed. Sunday passed. I walked from the bedroom to the kitchen and back slowly a little farther each day. The soreness faded by degrees. I slept more than I was used to, the body demanding what it needed to repair itself, and when I wasn't sleeping, I sat in the armchair and thought. I thought about the hospital ceiling, about the Facebook post, about $133,000 and the arithmetic of a relationship I'd been miscalculating for years. Monday came and went. No call from Daniel, no text. By Tuesday morning, the 20th of October, 5 full days since the surgery, I had stopped checking my phone every hour and started checking it once in the morning, the way you check the weather out of habit, not out of hope. Jim stopped by Tuesday afternoon with a plate of sandwiches his daughter had sent over when she heard what happened. He set the plate on the counter and stood there with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching me with that careful, measuring look of his. "Art," he said slowly, as he called. I cut one of the sandwiches in half with more precision than the task required. "Not yet." Jim pulled in a breath through his nose. "I ran into him yesterday," he said. "At the Food King on Broad Street. Him and Emily picking up groceries." My hands went very still on the counter. "And he asked how you were doing." Jim's voice was careful, and even the voice of a man choosing every word. "I told him you were home and resting. He said, 'Good, good,' and then Emily said something about the avocados being overpriced and they moved on." The sandwich sat on the counter in its two neat halves. I looked at it for a moment, at the clean, precise line where I'd cut it. "Good, good," I repeated. "Art, I'm all right, Jim." I picked up one of the sandwich halves and took a bite because if I didn't do something physical in that moment, something was going to crack open in my chest that I wasn't ready to deal with in front of another person. The bread tasted like nothing. I chewed and swallowed. "I'm all right." Jim watched me for a moment longer. Then he pulled out the chair and sat down. "You know," he said, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup, "Margaret used to say something. She said the measure of a person isn't what they do when things are easy. It's what they do when showing up costs them something." I set the sandwich down. My throat was working hard. "She was a smart woman," I said. "The smartest." Jim looked at his coffee. "What are you going to do, Art?" I looked at the phone face down on the side table in the other room, the phone that had not rung with Daniel's number in 5 days. Then I looked at the kitchen counter, at the groceries Jim had brought, at the plate of sandwiches his daughter had sent, at the accumulated evidence of what it looked like when someone actually gave a damn. "I don't know yet," I said honestly, "but something's changing. I can feel it." Jim nodded slowly. He did not push. He did not offer advice. He just sat there with his coffee in the kitchen of a man who was working something out and let the working happen. Outside, the October sky was the color of old pewter, and the maple in the backyard had gone almost bare. By evening, the first cold rain of autumn had begun to fall against the windows, steady and deliberate, like it meant to stay. And somewhere in the back of my mind, quiet as a key turning in a lock, something that had been closed for a very long time began to open. The phone rang at 3:14 in the afternoon on Monday, October 20th. I know the exact time because I'd been watching the clock above the mantel for the past hour, not deliberately, not waiting for anything specific, just the way a man's eyes drift toward a clock when his mind is working on something it hasn't finished yet. 3:14. 5 days, 18 hours, and roughly 42 minutes since I'd called my son from my kitchen and asked him to take me to the hospital. The name on the screen said Daniel. I looked at it through 2 full rings. My chest tightened the way it does before something you've been expecting finally arrives. Not surprise, not relief. just the particular tension of a door that's been closed for too long finally swinging open. I pressed the green button and put the phone to my ear. "Hey, Dad?" His voice was easy, casual, the voice of a man calling on an ordinary Monday afternoon with nothing particular on his mind. "How's everything going?" I let a beat pass before I answered. "Fine. Good. I could hear him shifting the creak of what I recognized as the leather office chair in his home study. "You've been resting up okay? Jim mentioned you were home." "Jim mentioned it," I said. "Yes. That's good. That's really good." Another small pause, the kind that happens when someone is getting ready to change direction. "Hey, listen, I was thinking I wanted to ask you something. You still have that savings account, right? The main one." The air in my living room went very still. Outside the window, the maple in the front yard shook its last few remaining leaves loose in a gust of October wind. I watched them spiral down to the lawn, 3, 4, 5 of them, and I kept my voice completely level. "That's your first question, Daniel." A beat. "What?" I said, "That's your first question." I shifted in the armchair, straightening slowly against the pull of my incision sights. "You haven't called in 5 days. You haven't asked how the surgery went. You haven't asked if I'm in pain, or whether I needed anything, or whether anyone was with me when I came out of the anesthesia." My voice stayed flat and even. Not angry, just precise, the way I used to be when I needed a younger guy on the floor to understand that I meant exactly what I was saying. "And your first question is about my savings account." The leather chair creaked again on his end. "Dad, come on. I knew you were okay. Jim told me you were home and resting. I would have called sooner, but things have been busy," I said. "I know. It's been a genuinely crazy week. Emily had her work thing Wednesday, and then we had the Hendersons over on Saturday, and it got away from me. But I'm calling now." His voice took on a slightly warmer, slightly more deliberate tone, the tone of a man in sales or marketing who's learned that warmth is a tool. "And I really do want to know how you're doing, Dad. How are you feeling?" Something sharp and small moved through my chest. Not anger. Something quieter and more final than anger. "I'm sore," I said. "I'm tired. I walked to the mailbox and back this morning, and that was enough exercise for the day. My neighbor Jim has been bringing me food, because I can't drive yet, and cooking is difficult when you've got 3 incision sites in your abdomen." I paused. "That's how I'm doing, Daniel. Now why don't you tell me about the savings account?" He exhaled a short, slightly relieved breath, like he was glad to be back on the track he'd planned. "Okay, so Emily and I have been talking seriously about upgrading the house. The place on Clover Ridge is great, but the backyard is pretty small, and we've been looking at a property out on Millbrook Road, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, almost half an acre. The problem is the down payment structure. We'd need to move on it soon before someone else does." I pressed my free hand flat against my knee. My knuckles were white. "How much?" I asked. $75,000. The clock above the mantel ticked. Once. Twice. $75,000, I repeated. "I know it's a big ask." His voice picked up pace slightly, the practiced momentum of a prepared pitch. "But with your savings and the equity in the house, it wouldn't even make a dent in your overall picture. And Emily and I would pay you back. We've got a solid income between us. We'd set up a structured repayment, whatever makes you comfortable. This is a real opportunity, Dad. Properties on Millbrook don't come up often." I thought about something then. I thought about a Facebook post and a caption that read, "Perfect family day with our baby," posted at 9:47 p.m. on October 15th, while I was lying on an operating table in Cedar Falls General with a laparoscopic camera in my abdomen and not a single family member in the building. I thought about Jim's face that morning at the hospital, the paper bag from Miller's Bakery, the 2 coffees. I thought about $133,000 tallied up in the dark of a hospital room in the small hours of the morning. "Daniel," I said carefully, Why do you need a bigger house? Well, like I said, more space, better neighborhood, the backyard. You told me the backyard is the issue. My voice was very quiet now. Cooper needs more room. A half-second of hesitation. He's a big dog, Dad. Golden retrievers need space to run. It's not good for them to be cooped up in a small yard all day. The room tilted slightly. Not physically, something interior, some last remaining structure, giving way under a weight it had been bearing for too long. You're asking me for $75,000, I said slowly, so that your dog has a bigger backyard. Dad, that's not the only reason. Daniel. Something in my tone made him stop. Do you know what I was doing on Wednesday night, October 15th, at 9:47 in the evening? A pause. Wary now. What do you mean? I was on an operating table, I said. Having emergency surgery, alone, because when I called you and told you I was in severe pain and needed someone to take me to the hospital, you told me you were walking the dog and to call an Uber. My voice did not crack. I would not let it crack. And then you posted a photograph on Facebook at 9:47 p.m. with the caption, "Perfect Family Day," while I was being cut open. The silence on his end lasted 4 full seconds. I counted them. Dad, I didn't know it was that serious. I told you I thought something was seriously wrong. My jaw tightened until the muscles ached. Those were my exact words. I think something might be seriously wrong with me. I thought you meant I don't know, indigestion or something. You've called about stomach stuff before, and it was appendicitis, Daniel. My voice came out harder than I intended, sharp as a weld line. If I had waited another few hours, it could have ruptured. That is a life-threatening complication. And I went through all of it alone, the ER, the consent forms, the surgery, waking up in recovery completely alone. Because you were at Riverside Park. I stopped, breathed, brought my voice back down. And 5 days later, the first thing you ask me is whether I still have my savings account. Another silence. Longer this time. I could hear him breathing. Dad, he finally said, and his voice had lost its practiced ease. I hear you. I do. And I'm sorry about that night, genuinely. I should have taken it more seriously. A pause. But we're talking now, and the Millbrook property is a real opportunity that has a real timeline. I know, I said. Something shifted in my chest, not the sharp, hot kind of pain, but the slow, grinding kind. The kind that comes from finally seeing something clearly that you've been squinting at for years. I know, Daniel, I said again, quieter this time. I'll call you back. I ended the call. Set the phone on the arm of the chair. Pressed both hands flat against my thighs and stared at the front window. The bare maple, the lawn covered in fallen leaves. The ordinary Monday afternoon going about its business outside. My hands were not shaking. I was past shaking. I was somewhere on the other side of it, in that cold, clear country, where a man ends up when he has finally run out of reasons not to see the truth. I sat in that armchair for a long time after the call ended. The October light through the front window moved slowly across the floor as the afternoon wore on, that pale, watery light that comes with the last weeks of fall, when the sun stays low and everything it touches looks slightly faded, like an old photograph left too long on a windowsill. My hands were folded in my lap. The phone was on the arm of the chair. I didn't move it. I was thinking about what Daniel had said. All of it. The structure of it. He had called on day 5. Not day 1, not day 2, day 5, when presumably enough time had passed that calling no longer felt like an admission of something. He had opened with, "How are you doing?" in the same tone he used to ask about the weather. And then in less than 90 seconds, he had arrived at the real destination of the call, $75,000 for a house on Millbrook Road, because Cooper needed a bigger yard. I picked up the phone. I found Daniel's name. I pressed call. He picked up on the second ring faster than he usually did, which told me he'd been holding the phone since I said I'd call back. Dad? His voice was carefully neutral, waiting. "Tell me about the house," I said. I heard him exhale relief or something close to it. "Okay, yeah. So the place on Millbrook is 4 beds, 3 baths, almost half an acre lot. The backyard is enormous, fully fenced, which is perfect for Cooper. There's a big covered porch, updated kitchen, 2-car garage. Emily fell in love with it the first time she saw the listing." "What's the asking price?" "480. We've got the financing arranged for the mortgage, our credit's good. The bank's already pre-approved us for 405. The issue is the gap between our current down payment savings and what the lender needs to see. We're about 75,000 short of where we need to be to lock in the rate we want." "And when do you need this money?" "The sellers want to close by mid-November, so realistically we'd need it within the next 2 weeks." He paused. "Dad, I know the timing is bad. I know you just got out of the hospital. That's why I wanted to ask now rather than wait. I didn't want it to become a bigger problem if we missed the window." Something in my stomach turned over. Not from the incision sites. From something else entirely. "You didn't want it to become a bigger problem," I said slowly. "You had emergency surgery 5 days ago, and this was the first call you made." "Dad, let me ask you something, Daniel." I kept my voice measured and even, the way I used to keep it when something on the factory floor needed to be said clearly and without drama. "The car I bought you in 2010, the $6,000, has any of that come back?" A beat of silence. "Things have been tight financially. You know that. We've had the mortgage and Emily's business had a slow year. The college tuition," I said. "25,000 over 4 years. Has any of that come back?" His voice tightened slightly. "Dad, I was barely making entry-level salary when I started at Hartwell." "The wedding," I said. $40,000. I took a personal loan out for that, Daniel. Did you know that I never told you, but I took out a personal loan and paid it off over 3 years. Has any of that come back?" Complete silence. "The down payment on your current house?" I continued, and my voice was frighteningly calm now. Calm the way deep water is calm. Nothing moving on the surface, but a great deal going on underneath. $60,000 from my retirement savings. The money your mother and I spent 20 years putting aside. 6 years ago. Has $1 of that come back? Dad. His voice cracked on the word, not with emotion, with something more like the sound of a structure under unexpected stress. Those were gifts. You offered. You always offered. I never asked you to. You always asked me, Daniel. Not loud, not harsh, just true. Maybe not in those words, but you always asked. I heard him breathings on the other end. Rapid, slightly uneven breaths, the breathing of a man whose prepared speech has gone completely off the rails. "So," I said, "you're asking me for another $75,000, bringing the total by my count to $208,000 over 20 years, so that Cooper the Golden Retriever can have a half-acre backyard on Millbrook Road. That's not—" His voice rose hot and sudden, and then he caught himself and pulled it back down. "Dad, that's not fair. The house isn't just about the dog. It's about our future. It's about starting a family. Emily and I have been talking about kids, and we need more space. You told me it was for Cooper's yard." My chest ached with something vast and tired. "Those were your exact words. Cooper needs space to run. It's both things. It's the yard and the space for a family, and—" He stopped. I could hear him pressing his hand against something, the muffled sound of frustration being physically contained. "Why are you doing this? Why are you turning this into some kind of, I don't know, some kind of audit? I'm your son. I'm asking for help. Isn't that what family does?" And there it was. The word I'd been waiting for, the word that always arrived eventually in these conversations like a trump card being played. Family. "You're right," I said. Family does help each other. I looked out the front window at the bare maple tree, at the fallen leaves on the lawn that I wasn't going to be able to rake for another 2 weeks because of 3 incision sites in my right side. But family also shows up, Daniel. Family drives you to the hospital when you call from your kitchen and say you think something is seriously wrong. Family calls the next morning to find out if you made it through surgery. Family doesn't wait 5 days and then call to ask about your savings account. My voice was barely above a conversational tone, but every word landed like something solid. That's what family does. The silence on his end stretched long and taut as a wire pulled past its limit. "I'm sorry about the hospital," he finally said, and his voice had gone very quiet. "I genuinely am. I didn't handle that right." "No," I agreed, "you didn't. So where does that leave us with the house?" I looked at the mantel above the fireplace. There was a photo there, Daniel, at maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting on the front porch steps of this house in his Little League uniform, grinning his enormous, missing-tooth grin at whoever was behind the camera. Margaret, probably. She was always the one with the camera. "I need to think," I said. "Dad." I said, "I need to think, Daniel." Firm, final. "I'll be in touch." I ended the call and set the phone face down on the arm of the chair. Then I sat there, in the quiet of my living room, in the pale October light, and I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the small drawer in the side table, the one where I kept stamps and expired coupons and things I didn't know what to do with, and I rummaged through it until my fingers found something I'd put there 3 months ago and half forgotten about. A business card. White, slightly bent at one corner, the print clean and simple. Sarah Mitchell. Director, Heartland Animal Rescue Foundation. Phone number, email, address on Elm Street. I had picked up an injured dog on a sidewalk in August and brought it to these people. I had spent an hour with this woman and walked through her shelter and listened to her talk about the animals in her care with the kind of matter-of-fact, unglamorous love that you don't perform for an audience. I turned the card over in my fingers, turned it back. Then I put it on the arm of the chair next to the phone and looked at it for a long moment, at this small white rectangle that had been sitting in a junk drawer for 3 months, waiting quietly the way certain things wait when they know their time is coming. Outside, the October wind moved through the bare maple and set the last few leaves spinning down through the pale afternoon air. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a door that had been standing ajar for days now swung open all the way. The business card was still warm from my fingers by the time I decided to stop just looking at it and actually do something about it. It was the evening of October 20th, the same day Daniel had called, the same day I'd sat in this armchair and listened to my son explain why a golden retriever needed a half-acre yard. Outside, the last of the afternoon light had gone gray and thin. I turned the card over once more. Sarah Mitchell. Director, Heartland Animal Rescue Foundation. Address on Elm Street. I remembered the morning I'd picked that card up. It was the second Saturday of August, early, cool, the kind of morning that promises a decent day before the heat gets going. I'd been out walking the neighborhood loop I do 3 times a week down Grayson to the park and back along Elm when I spotted the dog. She was huddled against the base of a chain-link fence behind the old Delmarco building. A small brown and white mixed breed, maybe 30 pounds, lying on her side, in a way that told me immediately that something was wrong. One back leg was held at an angle that made my stomach clench. There was dried blood matted into the fur along her ribs. I crouched down beside her. She lifted her head and looked at me with dark, exhausted eyes, and she didn't growl or flinch away. She just looked the way animals look when they've been hurting long enough that they've used up their fear. "All right," I told her. "Let's get you somewhere." I'd carried her the 4 blocks to Heartland Animal Rescue Foundation, with my shirt getting bloody and my lower back registering a formal complaint. The building was a converted warehouse on Elm Street, old brick, a hand-painted sign above the door, a row of planters out front, with the last of the summer flowers still hanging on. I pushed through the front door, and a young volunteer at the desk took one look at the dog in my arms and called out, "Sarah, Sarah, we've got a walk-in, she's injured." Sarah Mitchell came through the back door at something close to a jog. She was in her early 40s, medium height, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of face that looked like it spent more time outdoors than in. She was wearing jeans and a gray work shirt, with the Heartland logo on the pocket, and there was a smear of something on her left forearm that looked like it might have been food or mud or both. She came straight to me, took the dog from my arms with the confident, careful hands of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, and said, "How long has she been like this?" "No idea," I said. "I found her about 20 minutes ago, 4 blocks east." "Good that you brought her in." She was already moving toward the back. "Come on back. Tell me exactly where you found her." I followed her through a door into a treatment area, a clean, well-lit room with a steel exam table and a wall of medical supplies. She laid the dog down gently, murmuring something soft to her, while her hands moved over the injury with practiced efficiency. "She's dehydrated, and the leg looks like a break," Sarah said, not looking up. "Might be a few days old, she's been managing on her own for a while." Then she did look up, and she fixed me with a direct, clear gaze. "Thank you for not walking past her. A lot of people do." "I couldn't do that," I said simply. She nodded like that was the only acceptable answer. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I run this place." Arthur Hayes. While she called for the staff veterinarian, she showed me around briefly, the kennels, the cat room, the exercise yard out back. She told me about the foundation with the matter-of-fact tone of someone talking about work they love too much to be self-conscious about. Heartland had been operating for 11 years. They took in strays, abused animals, owner surrenders. They had 32 dogs and 19 cats in residence that day. Their lease on the Elm Street building was up for renewal in 14 months, and the landlord had already hinted at a significant rent increase. The dream was to buy the building outright. "It's a good dream," I told her. "It's an expensive one." She smiled, tired around the edges, but genuine. "We get there piece by piece." Before I left, she handed me her card. "The dog's going to be okay," she said. "We'll get the leg set and get her healthy. If you want updates, call or text anytime." I'd put the card in my jacket pocket, transferred it to the junk drawer when I got home, and there it had sat for 2.5 months, through a summer and a fall and an appendectomy and a phone call about a golden retriever's backyard. I picked up my phone. I typed, "Ms. Mitchell, this is Arthur Hayes. I brought in an injured dog back in August. I'd like to speak with you about something when you have time. It's regarding a potential donation. Not urgent, but important." I read it back once, then I sent it. The response came 11 minutes later. "Mr. Hayes, of course I remember you. The little brown and white girl made a full recovery and was adopted in September. I'd love to talk. Are you available this weekend?" I read that twice. The dog had made it. She'd found a home. Something loosened in my chest, not dramatically, not with any fanfare. Just a quiet easing, like a knot that had been pulled too tight, finally being given a little slack. I typed back, "Saturday morning works. I'll come to you." I set the phone down on the side table. Outside, the October dark had settled in completely over Cedar Falls, and the only light in my living room was the lamp in the corner casting its warm, small circle across the floor. The house was quiet, but for the first time in several days, the quiet felt less like emptiness and more like the pause before something begins. Before I go any further, if you are still here with me, drop the number 10 in the comments right now. Just a 10. That tells me you are in this story with me, and honestly, that means everything. A small note. The story ahead contains some fictional elements woven in for depth and storytelling. It may not reflect every detail of any one person's life, but if you would rather step away, this is a perfectly fine place to stop. For those staying, what comes next changes everything. Sarah's reply was still on my phone screen when I woke up the next morning. It was Tuesday, October 21st, and the light coming through the bedroom curtains had that particular flat, gray quality that means Ohio has decided to commit fully to autumn and isn't apologizing for it. I lay there for a few minutes before getting up the way I'd been doing since the surgery, taking inventory before moving, checking the soreness in my right side the way you check the weather before leaving the house. Better than yesterday. A little better every morning. I made coffee, stood at the kitchen window with the mug in both hands, and looked out at the backyard. The yard was the reason Margaret had chosen this house. Not the location, not the layout, not the price, the yard. I remember the day we walked through with the realtor back in the spring of 1989. Margaret had stepped out the back door, looked at that long rectangle of grass with the old oak at the far end, and said, "This is it, Arthur. This is the one." She'd been right. She was usually right about that kind of thing, about what a place had the potential to become. Over the years, she'd turned it into something. Flower beds along the south fence, a vegetable garden in the far corner that produced more tomatoes than two people could ever use. The wooden bench under the oak, the one I'd built for her birthday in 1994, slightly uneven on the left side because I was better with steel than wood, but she'd loved it anyway and refused to let me fix it. The bench was still there. I could see it from the kitchen window, damp with morning dew, the wood gone gray with 20 years of weather. I took my coffee outside. The cold hit me as soon as I opened the back door, sharp and clean, the kind of October cold that gets into your lungs and makes you feel awake all the way down. I moved carefully down the back steps, crossed the damp grass, and lowered myself onto the bench. The wood was cold through my jacket. My right side complained about the angle, and I shifted until I found a position it would tolerate. I sat there with my coffee, and I thought about Margaret. She'd been gone 18 years. Pancreatic cancer 4 months from diagnosis to the end, which was about as cruel a timeline as the disease can manage. Daniel had been 20 years old, home from his sophomore year at Ohio State, when we got the news, and he'd sat at this kitchen table and cried in a way I hadn't known how to respond to, because I was working so hard at not doing the same thing myself. Margaret had been the one who knew how to talk to Daniel. She had a gift for it, for sitting across from him and saying exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, for knowing when to push and when to simply be present. When she died, I'd lost my wife and Daniel had lost his mother, and the two of us had been left in this house together, two people who loved each other and had almost no idea how to say so. I'd done what I knew how to do. I worked. I paid bills. I made sure Daniel had what he needed. I wrote the checks. Sitting on Margaret's bench in the October cold 18 years later, I let myself ask the question I'd been circling for days. What would she say if she could see us now? I knew the answer. I'd always known it, really. She wouldn't be angry at Daniel, not the way I'd felt the burning, exhausted edge of anger in that phone call yesterday. She would be sad for him. Genuinely, achingly sad, the way she got sad about things that were wasteful, about people who had something good and didn't know it, who let it slip away because they were looking in the wrong direction. "He doesn't know what he's losing," she would say. That would be the heart of it. Not what he'd done wrong, not the money, not the 5 days of silence. She would go straight to the center of the thing and name it simply, "He doesn't know what he's losing." My coffee had gone lukewarm. I drank it anyway. The oak tree at the end of the yard had dropped most of its leaves. They lay in a thick, rust-colored carpet across the far corner of the grass, covering the old vegetable beds, softening everything. Daniel used to rake those leaves every fall when he was a boy. He'd complain about it exactly twice, loudly and at length, and then he'd actually do it with a thoroughness that was all his own, every corner, every edge, the rake lines perfectly parallel. He'd been like that as a kid, precise, careful, proud of what he did when he actually did it. I wondered when that had changed, or whether it had changed or just gotten buried under everything that came after. My eyes went wet without warning, not slowly, not politely, but all at once the way grief sometimes comes back after years of behaving itself. I pressed the back of my hand against my eyes and held it there, breathing steadily, feeling the cold air move in and out of my chest. "I tried, Margaret," I said out loud to the yard and the old oak and the gray October sky. My voice came out rough and thin. I don't know if I did it right, but I tried. The yard didn't answer. The oak tree didn't answer. But sitting there on the uneven bench she'd refused to let me fix with my cold coffee and my healing incision sites and my phone in my pocket, with Sarah Mitchell's message on the screen, I felt something that I could only describe as the faint, unmistakable pressure of being understood by someone who was no longer there to say it. I sat outside until the cold got serious about itself. Then I stood up, picked up my mug, and went back inside. In the kitchen, I washed out my mug and set it in the rack. Then I pulled out my phone and texted Jim, "Can you come over tomorrow morning? There's something I want to talk through." Jim's reply came back in 4 minutes. "I'll bring the coffee." 8 o'clock. I typed back 8 o'clock. I set the phone on the counter and stood there for a moment in the quiet kitchen, looking out at the backyard through the window. The bench under the oak. The fallen leaves. The gray sky going on forever above the roofline. Something was taking shape in me, something that had started as a feeling and was becoming slowly but unmistakably a decision. It wasn't fully formed yet, but it was getting there, and for the first time in a long time the direction of it felt right. Jim showed up at 8:01 on Wednesday morning, October 22nd, with a thermos of coffee under one arm and a brown paper bag from Miller's Bakery tucked against his side. He knocked twice his knock, the one I'd recognize in my sleep, and came in before I'd finished getting up from the kitchen table. "Sit down," he said, waving me back into my chair. "You're not supposed to be jumping up for guests yet." "I'm not jumping," I said. "I'm standing at a medically appropriate pace." "Uh-huh." He set the thermos and the bag on the table, pulled out the chair across from me, and dropped into it with the easy familiarity of a man who'd sat in that chair 100 times before. He unscrewed the thermos cap, poured 2 cups, and pushed one toward me without asking. Then he leaned back, crossed his arms, and looked at me with that careful, measuring look of his, the one that meant he was prepared to listen to whatever came next, however long it took. "All right, Art," he said, "talk." So I did. I told him everything. I started with the phone call on October 20th. Daniel's voice easy and relaxed, 5 days of silence, and then straight to the savings account. I told him about the house on Millbrook Road, and the $75,000, and the half-acre yard for a golden retriever. I told him about the numbers I'd added up in the hospital in the dark, the car, the college tuition, the wedding loan. I'd never mentioned the $60,000 for the Clover Ridge down payment. $208,000 over 20 years, give or take. Jim didn't say a word through any of it. He held his coffee cup in both hands, and he watched my face, and he listened with the kind of full, concentrated attention that most people only give to things they're being paid to hear. His jaw tightened once when I got to the part about Daniel's first question. A muscle jumped in his cheek when I described the Facebook post. But he didn't speak. He let me get to the end of it. When I finished, I picked up my coffee cup and found it had gone cold while I was talking. I drank it anyway. Jim set his cup down on the table slowly. He looked at it for a moment, then looked back up at me. "And Sarah Mitchell," he said, "the shelter woman. I texted her Monday evening. We're meeting Saturday morning at Heartland." I held his gaze. "I'm thinking about changing my will, Jim. Leaving the house, the savings, the lake property, all of it to Heartland Animal Rescue Foundation." Jim didn't blink, didn't flinch. He absorbed that the way he absorbed most things, steadily, without drama. "Have you talked to a lawyer?" he asked. "Not yet. I'll call George Caldwell this week. He drew up my original will 10 years ago." I set my cup down. "I need 2 witnesses for the new document. People who aren't beneficiaries. I met his eyes directly. I was hoping you'd be one of them. Jim was quiet for a moment. A real moment. Not a polite pause. He looked at the table, then at the window, then back at me. I could see him thinking it through the way he thought through everything seriously, without rushing to the comfortable answer. Then he said, "Do you want me to try to talk you out of it first, or have you already decided?" The question was so precisely Jim that something loosened in my chest, a knot I hadn't realized I'd been carrying since the moment I'd picked up that business card 2 nights ago. "I've decided," I said. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who would tell me if I was being a fool. Jim looked at me for another long beat. His eyes were steady and serious and entirely without judgment. "You're not being a fool," he said. "You're being a man who's finally done waiting to be treated like one." He picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, and refilled it from the thermos. "I'll be your witness, Art. You don't even have to ask." My throat closed up so fast it surprised me. I pressed my lips together hard and looked at the window at the gray October morning outside, at the bare branches of the maple moving in the wind. I was not going to cry in my kitchen at 8 in the morning over a cup of cold coffee. I almost did anyway. "Jim," I said when I trusted my voice again, "you've been bringing me food for 12 days. The soup was from the diner. I just carried it. You drove to the hospital at 6 in the morning. I had nothing else going on." "Jim," Arthur. His voice was firm and quiet and final. "Margaret was my friend too. You think I don't know what you've been carrying since she died? You think I haven't watched you write every check and drive to every soccer game and show up to every single thing alone for 18 years? He set his cup down with a small, precise click. "Let me do this. It matters to me." "Okay." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice to carry anything more than that. Jim picked up his coffee again. Outside, a blue jay landed on the fence post by the gate, looked around with the imperious confidence of a bird that owns whatever it's standing on, and flew away. "Call Caldwell today," Jim said, "and Art for what it's worth." He paused. "Margaret would have done the same thing." 4 days passed in the particular quiet that settles over a house when a decision has been made but not yet acted on, a waiting kind of quiet, purposeful and still. It was Thursday evening, October 23rd. George Caldwell's office had confirmed an appointment for Friday, the 7th of November. Sarah Mitchell and I had exchanged 2 more messages about Saturday's meeting at Heartland. Everything was in motion, quiet and steady the way I preferred. I was in the armchair with a book I wasn't really reading when my phone buzzed on the side table. Not a call. A text message. The name on the screen said Daniel. I picked it up. The message read, "He actually asked about the savings account again today. You think he'll move before we close on Millbrook? We need to nail down the timeline before he does something stupid." I stared at the screen. Then a second message came through 30 seconds later. "Wait, wrong number. Sorry." I set the phone down on the arm of the chair. I set it down slowly and carefully, the way you set down something fragile that you're not sure will hold its shape if you let go too fast. He had meant to send that to Emily. I knew that without being told. The wrong number he'd caught himself on, that wrong number was me. His father. The man whose savings account he was nailing down a timeline around. I looked at the phone for a long time without touching it. The room was very quiet. Outside, Cedar Falls was doing what it always did on a Thursday evening in late October, going about its business unhurried and indifferent, paying no attention whatsoever to what had just landed in my lap. He actually asked about the savings account again today, before he does something stupid. I thought about Daniel at 7 years old, sitting on my shoulders at Cedar Falls Reservoir, with both arms stretched wide like he was flying. I thought about the birthday card in Margaret's keeping room, the backwards D in Danny. I thought about 35 years of overtime and a rainy day fund that had turned into car loans and wedding checks and down payments. I thought about the word stupid. My eyes were dry. My hands were steady. Something in me that had been waiting for a final, clean piece of evidence had just received it. I opened my messages to George Caldwell. Friday, the 7th of November. I typed, "I'll be there at 2 o'clock. Let's make sure the paperwork is ready." I sent it. Set the phone face down on the side table, and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard at the old oak tree at the bench Margaret had refused to let me fix at the leaves piled deep and rust red in the corner where the vegetable garden used to be. My house, my life, my decision, and it was already made. The first Saturday of November arrived cold and clear, the kind of Ohio morning that makes no apologies about what season it is. I pulled into the parking lot on Elm Street at 5 minutes before 10, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment looking at the Heartland Animal Rescue Foundation building through the windshield. It looked the same as it had an August-old brick hand-painted sign, the planters out front, now empty and waiting for spring. But something about the building felt different to me this morning. In August, I'd walked through that door carrying an injured dog and not much else. This morning, I was walking through it carrying something considerably heavier. I got out of the car, pulled my jacket closed against the November air, and went inside. Sarah Mitchell was waiting just inside the front door, and she put her hand out before I'd finished stepping through. Her grip was firm and direct, the handshake of someone who didn't waste time on formalities. "Mr. Hayes?" Her face was warm and unguarded, nothing performed about it. "It's good to see you again. How's the recovery going?" "Better every week," I said. "Doctor cleared me to drive last Monday. First thing I did was schedule this." Something in her expression shifted just slightly, just enough. "That means a lot," she said. "Come on back." She led me through the main room. A few volunteers were already working the morning shift, filling food bowls, moving through the kennels with the easy routine of people who knew exactly what they were doing. The smell was the same as I remembered, clean straw and antiseptic, and underneath it all, the warm, living smell of animals. It was a good smell, an honest one. We settled in her office, a small room off the back hallway, barely enough space for a desk, 2 chairs and a shelf of binders that looked like they'd been heavily consulted. A child's drawing was taped to the wall beside the window, a dog with an enormous smile and the words, "Thank you, Heartland," written in crayon across the top. Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee from a small machine on the corner of her desk and pushed one toward me. Then she folded her hands on the desk and looked at me with the same direct, clear attention I remembered from August. "You said you wanted to talk about a donation," she said. "I don't want to assume anything about the scale or the nature of it, so why don't you tell me what you have in mind, and we'll go from there." I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, looked at the child's drawing on the wall for a moment. Then I looked back at her. "Before I do," I said, "I'd like to know more about you, about how you ended up here." She blinked, not with surprise exactly, but with the slight recalibration of someone who'd expected a different kind of conversation. Then she leaned back in her chair, and something in her posture settled into something more honest. "All right," she said. "Fair enough." She grew up in the foster care system, born in Columbus, moved through 7 different placements between the ages of 4 and 16. "Not all of them bad," she said, "but none of them permanent. None of them the kind of place you could call yours." At 19, she'd been living in a rooming house in Cincinnati, working double shifts at a diner, when she found a cat in the alley behind the building, half-starved, one eye swollen shut, so thin she could feel every rib when she picked it up. "I took her home," Sarah said. "Fed her tuna out of a can for 2 weeks, because I didn't know what else to do. Took her to the free clinic when the eye got worse." She smiled, not a big smile, just a real one, the kind that lives at the corner of the mouth. "The vet tech at the clinic said I had good instincts with animals. Said I should look into working with a rescue organization." She spread her hands slightly. "That was 22 years ago. And you built all of this," I said, "piece by piece. 11 years on Elm Street. We started with 6 kennels and 2 volunteers. Now we've got 32 dogs, 19 cats, 12 regular volunteers, and a lease that's going to become a very serious problem in about 14 months. Her voice stayed even, but I heard what was underneath it, the particular exhaustion of someone who's been holding something together through sheer force of will for a long time. The landlord's been making noises about selling the building. We can make our rent, but we can't compete with the developer's offer. How much would it take to buy the building outright? She told me the number. It was significant. It was also, by my rough calculations, somewhat less than $620,000. Mr. Hayes. Her voice was careful now, careful in the way of someone who doesn't want to say the wrong thing and ruin something fragile. What exactly are you considering? I set my coffee cup down. I looked at this woman at the work shirt with the stain on the cuff, at the child's drawing on the wall, at the binders full of records for 32 dogs and 19 cats, and however many animals had passed through this building in 11 years. And I thought about Daniel's voice saying, sooner or later, all of this is going to be ours anyway. I'm 72 years old, I said. I have a house worth about $1.8 million, a savings account, with $620,000 and a piece of land on the lake that I haven't been to in 4 years. I have one son. And last month, when I called that son from my kitchen and told him I was in severe pain and needed a ride to the hospital, he told me he was walking his dog and to call an Uber. Sarah's face didn't move, but her eyes did a quick, involuntary deepening, the way someone's eyes change when something lands hard. I'm thinking about changing my will, I said. Leaving everything to Heartland. The house, the savings, the land. In exchange for the right to live in my house until I die, what a lawyer would call a life estate. After that, everything transfers to you. I held her gaze. The condition is that Heartland continues operating as an animal rescue organization, not sold, not converted, just kept doing what it does. Sarah's throat moved. She looked down at her desk for one moment, one single moment of composure, being very deliberately gathered, and then she looked back up at me, and her eyes were bright in a way that she wasn't trying to hide. Mr. Hayes, she said, and her voice came out slightly rougher than it had been. I need to ask you something directly, and I hope you'll forgive me for it. Are you doing this out of anger because anger passes and a decision like this doesn't? The question hit me square in the chest. I held it there for a moment, turning it over. No, I said. I thought about that. I'm doing this because for 20 years I gave money to someone who saw it as his due and never once looked at me the way your volunteers look at those animals in there. Like what they were doing mattered. Like I mattered. My voice stayed level. I want what I built to go somewhere it will be valued. That's not anger. That's just finally being honest about what I want. Sarah pressed her lips together. Her eyes were still bright. She nodded once slowly, with the careful gravity of someone accepting something that deserves to be accepted carefully. Then I would be honored, she said. Truly. I picked up my coffee. Outside the office window, I could hear the dogs in the kennels starting their morning noise, a chorus of barks and whines, entirely unself-conscious, entirely alive. Call your lawyer, she said. And Mr. Hayes, thank you. Not just for this, for bringing in that little brown and white dog in August. Her smile came back fuller this time. She's living on a farm in Medina County now. Chases squirrels all day. Something warm and loosened moved through my chest. Good, I said. That's exactly where she should be. 7 days later, on the afternoon of Friday, November 7th, I put on the blue shirt Margaret had given me for my 68th birthday and drove downtown to the office of George Caldwell, attorney at law. George had been my lawyer for over 15 years. A compact, precise man in his early 60s with silver hair, reading glasses that lived permanently on the end of his nose, and the manner of someone who had seen enough of human nature in legal documents to be unsurprised by most of what people did with their money and their lives. His office was on the fourth floor of the Meridian Building on Commerce Street, bookshelves, floor-to-ceiling a mahogany desk that had probably outlasted 3 generations of clients, a window that looked out over the Cedar Falls Courthouse Square. Jim was already there when I arrived, sitting in one of the 2 chairs across from the desk, his barn jacket folded over his knee, his hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee from the machine in the hallway. He looked up when I walked in and gave me a single firm nod, the nod of a man who had come to do something and intended to do it properly. "Art," he said. "Jim," I said. "Thank you for being here. Wouldn't be anywhere else." George Caldwell came in from his inner office 30 seconds later, hand-extended reading glasses already in place. "Arthur." His grip was firm and brief. "Sit down. I've got everything prepared." He settled into his chair, opened the folder on the desk, and looked at me over his glasses with the direct, no-nonsense attention that had made me trust him 15 years ago. "Before we go through the documents, I need to ask you the standard questions. Not because I doubt your judgment, because it's my professional obligation, and because these documents need to be airtight." He paused. "Are you entering into this agreement of your own free will without coercion or undue influence from any party?" "Yes," I said. "Are you of sound mind? And do you understand the full nature and consequences of the changes you're making to your estate plan?" "Yes. And you understand that under the terms of the life estate provision, you retain full rights to occupy the property at Grayson Street for the duration of your natural life, and that all rights of ownership, including inheritance rights, transfer to Heartland Animal Rescue Foundation upon your death." "I understand." George nodded, made a small note, and began walking me through the documents. He had prepared 3 separate instruments: the amended last will and testament, a life estate deed for the Grayson Street property, and a transfer on death designation for the savings and investment accounts. He explained each one in clear, plain language, not because he thought I couldn't follow the legal terminology, but because that was how he did things, and I appreciated it. He explained that the lake property would be handled through the will as a specific bequest to Heartland, that the savings accounts would transfer automatically upon my death through the TOD designation without going through probate, and that the life estate deed would be recorded with the county immediately upon signing, making my intent a matter of public record. "Once this deed is recorded," George said, tapping the life estate document with one finger, "the property interest belongs to Heartland. You keep the right to live there, but the underlying ownership has transferred. No one can challenge that through a standard inheritance claim." He looked at me steadily. "You understand what that means?" "It means Daniel can't contest it," I said. George's expression didn't change. "It means the ownership structure is established during your lifetime, which makes it considerably more difficult to challenge than a testamentary bequest." "Yes." He paused. "Is that a concern?" "It's a consideration," I said. "Let's proceed." Sarah Mitchell arrived at 2:30 exactly on time, in a clean blazer over her Heartland workshirt, a concession to the formality of the occasion that somehow made me like her more rather than less. She shook George's hand, shook Jim's hand, sat in the chair beside mine, and accepted the copy of the documents that George's assistant brought in. She read everything. All of it, every page, with the focused attention of someone who took seriously the responsibility of what she was accepting. When she finished, she set the papers down on her knee and looked at me. "Mr. Hayes," she said quietly. "Are you sure?" "Sarah." I met her eyes. "I have never been more sure of anything since I decided to ask Margaret Hayes to marry me in 1974. Something moved across her face, a brightness, that she pressed her lips together against, blinking hard once. She nodded, picked up her pen. "We signed an order, me first, then Sarah on behalf of Heartland, then Jim and George as witnesses. George adding his notary seal to each instrument with the mechanical precision of a man doing something for the 10,000th time. The scratch of pens on paper was the only sound in the room for several minutes. Outside the window, the Cedar Falls Courthouse Square was bright and cold in the November afternoon light. When the last page was signed, and George had gathered everything into the folder, he looked across the desk at me with an expression that was professional, and also, I thought, something more than that. "It's done, Arthur," he said. "I'll file the life estate deed with the county recorder's office this afternoon. Everything else goes into effect at the time of your passing." He extended his hand. "For whatever it's worth, I think you've done something good here." I shook his hand. My grip was steady. My hand did not shake. Jim stood up beside me and put his hand briefly on my shoulder, one firm, wordless press, the kind that carries more than most speeches do. Sarah was already on her feet, and when she shook my hand this time, she held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires, her other hand coming up to cover mine, her eyes bright and full and unashamed. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was rough at the edges. "I mean that with everything I have." "I know you do," I said. "That's exactly why." We walked out of George Caldwell's office at 10 minutes past 3 and stepped out into the cold November afternoon. The three of us stood on the sidewalk outside the Meridian building. For a moment, me, Jim, Sarah, in the clean, bright, unhurried air of a Friday afternoon in Cedar Falls, Ohio. Jim looked at me. "How do you feel?" I thought about it. Really thought about it the way the question deserved. "Like myself," I said. "For the first time in a long time, exactly like myself." Jim smiled. Not a big smile, the right size. And then, because the paperwork was done, and the afternoon was cold, and there was nothing left to stand around, about the three of us went our separate ways into the ordinary Friday, carrying something between us that wasn't ordinary at all. On the drive home, I passed the school on Birchwood Avenue, where Daniel had gone to elementary school, red brick chain-link fence, the old climbing structure still in the corner of the yard. I slowed down without meaning to, looked at it for a moment. Then I kept driving. The house would still be my house, for as long as I was in it. But when I walked through that door tonight, something would be different. Something that had been pressing down on me for a very long time had lifted cleanly, completely, without drama. And the evening ahead felt for the first time in longer than I could remember entirely my own. It was just past 6 in the evening on Friday, November 7th, 2025. And I pulled into the driveway of my house on Maple Ridge Road with steadier hands than I'd had in weeks. George Caldwell's office was 11 minutes away. I'd counted every traffic light on the way home, every bare oak tree, every familiar cracked sidewalk corner. Signing those documents this afternoon had done something strange to me. Not emptied me out, exactly. More like set something down that I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten the weight of it. I cut the engine and sat in the dark for a moment. The porch light glowed amber through the windshield. I'd left it on every night since Margaret died, 7 years and counting. She always said a lit porch meant someone was waiting for you to come home. She'd understand. I said out loud to the steering wheel, to the empty car, to nobody at all. Inside, I hung my coat on the hook by the door and went straight to the kitchen to put on a pot of coffee. While it brewed, I stood at the window and watched the last of the November light bleed out of the sky over Cedar Falls. The neighbor's maple had gone completely bare. 3 weeks ago, those branches were on fire with red and gold. Now they were just black lines against a gray sky stripped clean by the wind. I poured my coffee and carried it upstairs. The spare bedroom Margaret used to call it her keeping room. That was her word for it. Not a storage room, not a spare room. A keeping room. Because everything in there was something worth keeping. I pushed the door open and pulled the chain on the overhead bulb. The cedar smell hit me immediately, layered underneath, with the faint ghost of her rosewater perfume. I had to stop in the doorway for a second and just breathe through it. The dark walnut chest sat against the far wall, the one her mother had given her for her 30th birthday. I carried my coffee over, set it on the windowsill, and knelt down in front of it slowly, carefully, my abdomen still tender from the surgery 2 weeks ago, and lifted the lid. Daniel's third-grade school portrait was right on top. Gap-toothed grin hair sticking up on one side, eyes bright and alive and full of something that looked exactly like Margaret on her best days. I laughed out loud. Just a short, sudden sound in the quiet room, but real. "Lord, you were something else, kid," I said, and propped the photo against the wall where I could see it. I kept going. A birthday card from 2003 in Daniel's 12-year-old handwriting, the letters still round and unpracticed. "Dad, you're the strongest man I know. I want to be just like you when I grow up. Love, Danny." The D in Danny was slightly backwards. I ran my thumb over the ink and felt my chest tighten the way it does when something is both beautiful and terrible at the same time. "You wrote that," I whispered. "You wrote that, Daniel. I didn't make it up." I found a Christmas ornament he'd built out of popsicle sticks and red paint in 4th grade. The paint cracked and peeling now. A photograph of the three of us at Niagara Falls, summer of 1998. Daniel was 11, sunburned across the nose, holding my hand, without embarrassment, the way boys do before they decide they're too old for that. Margaret was laughing at something off camera, her hair loose around her shoulders. I remembered the exact sound of that laugh. Low and quick, like a surprise. I set everything out on the floor, piece by piece. Then I went to the filing cabinet in my bedroom and pulled the accordion folder I'd labeled Daniel Financial 15 years ago. Inside, the $8,000 car loan receipt signed April 2005. The $25,000 wire transfer confirmation for his college tuition, April 2008. The $40,000 cashier's check stub from his wedding, June 2015. The $60,000 retirement fund transfer record, December 2018. I paperclipped all four together without ceremony and set the stack beside the birthday card. $133,000, every cent documented. I wasn't doing it to wound him. I need to say that plainly. I wasn't building a case or laying a trap. I was building something else, a record of what a father looks like when he shows up. When he shows up, even when it costs him. When he shows up because love isn't a feeling you wait around for. It's a decision you make every single morning before your feet even hit the floor. I went back to the keeping room and sat on the edge of the old wooden chair by the window, the one with the loose right leg that I'd been meaning to fix for 3 years. "What are you doing, Arthur?" I asked myself out loud. My voice came out rougher than I expected, but I knew what I was doing. I found a flat wooden box oak about the size of a shoebox, something I'd built myself, back in 1987 when Daniel was born. I'd meant to give it to him someday, as a keepsake, a father-to-son kind of thing. Never got around to it. Now I lifted it down from the shelf, ran my hand across the lid, and began to place everything inside. The photos, the birthday card, the Christmas ornament wrapped carefully in a dish towel, the financial receipts, and at the very bottom, face down at first, then face up, because I decided he deserved to see it, a photograph of me and Daniel at Cedar Falls Reservoir, summer of 1994. He was 7 years old and sitting on my shoulders, both arms stretched wide like he was flying the biggest grin I had ever seen on a human face. On the back in Margaret's handwriting, Arthur and Danny, our whole world, July 4th. I closed the lid. The coffee had gone cold. Outside Cedar Falls was settling into Friday night, a dog barking somewhere down the block. A car rolling slow past the house, the distant sound of a train. Ordinary sounds. Good sounds. I carried the box downstairs and set it in the center of the kitchen table. Then I stood back and looked at it for a long moment. I had no way of knowing, standing there in my kitchen on the evening of November 7th, that by this time tomorrow, the most important conversation of my life would already be over. I didn't sleep well that Friday night. Not from grief, not from regret, just the ordinary restlessness of a man who has made a large decision and is still waiting for the world to catch up with it. By 6 in the morning on Saturday, November 8th, I was already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table with fresh coffee and the oak box in front of me. Jim arrived first at 7:30, the way he always did, no phone call ahead, just his familiar knock, 3 raps, then 1. I called from the kitchen, and he let himself in with the spare key I'd given him back in 2011 when Margaret got sick the first time. "You look like you slept in a bus station," he said, hanging his coat on the hook and heading straight for the coffee pot. "I slept fine." "You look like you didn't." I said I slept fine, Jim. He poured himself a mug, turned around, and looked at the oak box on the table. He'd known it was coming. I'd told him everything the night before after Caldwell's. But seeing it sitting there in the morning light seemed to land differently. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down heavy. "That's the box," he said. "That's the box. Everything in it. Everything," I said. The photos, the card from when he was 12, the receipts, the ornament he made in 4th grade. All of it. Jim wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at the box for a moment. His jaw worked slowly, the way it did when he was thinking something through. "He's going to fall apart," Jim said quietly. "Maybe. No, maybe about it, Arthur. When that boy opens that box and sees what's inside, he needs to see it," I said. My voice came out flat and certain, and I meant it that way. Not to hurt him. To show him what showing up actually looks like. Because somebody ought to. Jim nodded slowly. He didn't argue. That was the thing about Jim Harmon, 64 years old, retired shop teacher man, who'd coached 3 generations of Cedar Falls kids through woodworking and basic wiring, and the occasional personal crisis he knew when a man had finished deciding something. Sarah Mitchell arrived at 9:15 in the White Heartland Animal Rescue Foundation van, the logo on the door slightly faded from the sun. She was carrying a manila folder of her own copies of the notarized transfer documents Caldwell had prepared. Everything filed, everything legal, and above reproach. She shook my hand at the door. Stepped inside, nodded at Jim, and set her folder on the counter. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked. "Like a man who slept in a bus station," Jim offered from the table. Sarah glanced at him, then back at me, a small dry smile crossing her face. "George called me last night after you left. He wanted to make sure you understood the life estate clause completely, that you retained full residential rights indefinitely. No one can remove you from this property." "I know what I signed, Sarah. I know you do. I just—" She paused, looked at the oak box on the table. "Is that it?" "That's it." She didn't touch it. She just looked at it with an expression I recognized, the same one she'd had when she showed me the kennels at Heartland, when she talked about the animals that came in broken and frightened and learned eventually to trust again. Something careful and hopeful at the same time. We were still talking through the document copies, Sarah at the counter. "Joel?" Me standing by the window with my second cup of coffee when I heard the car in the driveway. I knew the sound. A 2022 silver Honda CR-V with a loose heat shield that rattled on cold mornings. I'd offered to fix it twice. Daniel always said he'd take it to the shop. He never took it to the shop. I set my mug down and watched through the kitchen window as the CR-V pulled in next to Jim's truck and Sarah's van. Through the windshield, I could see Daniel behind the wheel. He was leaning forward slightly, staring at the 2 unfamiliar vehicles in his father's driveway on a Saturday morning. Even from this distance, even through glass, I could see something shift in his face, the color leaving it. Emily was in the passenger seat. She pressed her hand to the dashboard as Daniel braked hard. The car doors opened. Daniel came across the driveway at nearly a jog, his breath misting in the cold November air. He was still in weekend clothes, dark jeans, a gray hoodie, no jacket despite the 38-degree morning. He hit the front porch steps hard and knocked twice fast and urgent before grabbing the handle and pushing the door open himself. Dad! His voice cracked on the single syllable. He came through the entryway, saw Jim, saw Sarah, saw the manila folder on the counter, and his face went completely white. Dad, what is this? What's going on? Is it the appendix? Did something? Daniel! I kept my voice level. I'm standing right here. I'm fine. He crossed the kitchen in 4 strides and grabbed my arm with both hands, looking me up and down the way you'd check a man who'd just fallen from a height. His eyes were wide and wet at the corners, and his jaw was working hard. You're fine, he repeated. But it came out like a question. Then why is there a lawyers? Who are these people? Why is there a dad? There's a van outside that says animal rescue. What is... Daniel. I put my hand over both of his. His skin was cold from the walk across the driveway. Sit down. Emily had come in behind him. She stood in the kitchen doorway, with her arms crossed tight over her chest, her eyes moving from the folder to Sarah to the oak box sitting in the center of the table. I watched something change in her expression when she saw the box, not fear exactly, something more like recognition. What is that? Daniel asked, following my eyes to the table. His voice had dropped. The panic was still there, but underneath it something else was opening up, something slower and more uncertain, the way a man's voice changes when he stops being afraid of one thing and starts being afraid of something else entirely. I looked at my son, 38 years old, still holding my arm with both hands, still breathing hard from running across his father's driveway on a cold November morning because he thought I was dying. I looked at the box. Sit down, Daniel, I said again quietly. There are some things I need to show you. Daniel sat down at my kitchen table on the morning of Saturday, November 8th. Not because he wanted to, but because his legs looked ready to give out. Emily stayed in the doorway, arms crossed tight over her chest, eyes moving from the oak box to Sarah to Jim, like she was trying to solve a problem that kept changing shape. Jim set his mug down and moved quietly toward the back door. Sarah stepped to the counter. They both understood what was about to happen needed witnesses, not an audience. I appreciated that more than I could say. I sat across from my son and placed my hands flat on the table, one on each side of the box. Daniel, I said, open it. His jaw tightened. Dad, who are these people? Why is there an animal rescue van in your driveway? What is going on? Open the box. Not angry, firm. The way I used to speak when he was 16 and needed to hear me through all the noise he carried. His hands shook as he reached for the lid. I noticed that the same trembling I'd had the night I signed those documents. For a moment I almost said something soft, but I let him do it himself. He lifted the lid. The 3rd-grade portrait was right on top. Gap-toothed grin hair sticking up, eyes bright with something that looked like Margaret on her best days. Daniel made a small sound, somewhere between a breath and a word that never made it out. He picked the photo up with 2 fingers like it might break. Garfield Elementary, I said. Mrs. Donahue's class. You lost those 2 teeth on a Tuesday and came home so proud I thought you'd won a trophy. His throat moved. He set the photo down and reached for the birthday card beneath it. I watched his face as he read his own 12-year-old handwriting. Dad, you're the strongest man I know. I want to be just like you when I grow up. Love, Danny, the D in Danny still slightly backwards after all these years. His chin dropped to his chest. Daniel? Emily moved half a step forward. I'm fine, he said. His voice cracked straight through the middle of it. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and breathed hard through his nose, shoulders pulling in. Then he found the receipts. Paper clipped together, ordered by date. He read each one. The $8,000 car loan, 2005. The $25,000 tuition transfer, 2008. The $40,000 wedding check, 2015. The $60,000 retirement fund, 2018. $133,000, I said. Every cent I gave you. Every cent in writing. Daniel pressed both palms flat on the receipts, leaning forward, breathing like a man who'd been running hard and just stopped. "Dad!" His voice came out wrecked and raw. "I didn't know you kept all of this. I kept everything. Why are you showing me this now?" His eyes came up to mine, red, wet jaw trembling. "Are you trying to make me feel?" "I'm not trying to make you feel anything," I said. "I'm trying to show you what a father looks like, what showing up looks like. I didn't give you those things expecting something back. I gave them because I loved you so much, it never once occurred to me to keep score." I stopped, swallowed. Until the night I lay in a hospital bed alone, and the first thing you asked me 5 days later was whether the savings account was still there. The sound that came out of Daniel then had no clean name. Not crying exactly. Something buried deeper under 38 years of ordinary distance and ordinary taking for granted, breaking the surface all at once. He pressed both hands over his face and his whole body shook with it, shoulders heaving, breath coming apart. Emily crossed the kitchen and put her hand on his back. Her own eyes were bright and wet. "Arthur," she said softly, "we never thought we didn't." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's exactly the point." Daniel dragged his hands slowly down his face. He looked at me the way he hadn't since he was small, every practiced, polished adult layer stripped away, just a son and his father, with nothing left between them. "It's already done, isn't it?" he said. "The house, the savings, the land. Signed and filed. I'll live here as long as I'm able. After that, it goes to people who've spent their lives caring for the ones nobody wanted." His face crumpled. He shook his head slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry." I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. His knuckles were white and cold and still trembling. "I know you are son," I said, "and I meant every word of it. I didn't say I forgive you because forgiveness isn't something you hand across a table like a receipt. It's something that grows slowly in its own time, like everything that lasts." But I held his hand, and he let me. And for the first time in longer than I could easily name, that was enough. The first snow came to Cedar Falls on the morning of Thursday, December 4th, 2025. I was already awake when it started, sitting at the kitchen window, both hands around a mug of coffee, watching the flakes come down soft and unhurried over Maple Ridge Road, like they had nowhere else to be. I had somewhere to be by 9. I'd been volunteering at the Heartland Animal Rescue Foundation on Elm Street every Tuesday and Thursday since the second week of November. Sarah had put me on the morning feeding rotation, kennels 1 through 8, fresh water, clean, bedding, basic health checks. Simple work. The kind that asks everything of your attention and gives you back something you didn't know you needed. Marcus, one of the young volunteers, handed me the feeding chart when I came through the side door at 8:10. 23 years old, studying veterinary science, the kind of kid who'd always known his direction in life. "Kennel 6 has a new one," he said. "Older dog, maybe 10 or 11. Stray, no chip. He hasn't warmed up to anyone yet. We've been calling him Duke." I found Duke in the far corner, large mixed-breed gray around the muzzle, one ear that folded slightly wrong. He tracked me when I walked in, but didn't flinch. He'd been through enough to know a stranger wasn't automatically a threat. He just wasn't sure I was worth the risk. I sat down on the floor a few feet away and opened the feeding container. "I'm not going to rush you," I said. "I've got time." I told him my name. Told him I was 72, that I'd spent 35 years welding steel, raised one son, loved one woman my whole life. I told him I had a yard with an oak tree and a keeping room full of things worth keeping. He watched me for a long moment. Then he got up, walked over, and ate. When he finished, he pressed his gray muzzle against the back of my hand just once, briefly, and lay down beside me like we'd been doing it for years. My eyes went wet. I let them. Later, I found Sarah in her office and stood in the doorway. "I want to put in an adoption application." She looked up. For Duke." "For Duke." "Arthur, you know we're going to say yes." "I know," I said, "but I want to do it right." She laughed, warm and sudden, and reached for a form. That afternoon, I found a letter in the mailbox. Daniel's handwriting on the envelope uneven and familiar. The same hand that had written, "I want to be just like you 38 years ago." One page inside. No excuses, no requests. Just a sun finally showing up. I read it twice, folded it, set it beside the oak box on the table. Outside, snow kept falling over Cedar Falls, quiet and steady, and exactly enough. If there is one thing this family story taught me, one thing I would carry to my last day, it is this: love is not measured in what you say at a dinner table or what you promise over the phone. It is measured in whether you show up. Whether you show up when it is inconvenient, when it costs you something, when nobody is watching and no one will ever thank you for it. I spent 72 years learning that the hard way. I believe God puts certain moments in your life not to punish you, but to show you what you are made of and what the people around you are made of too. That hospital night was mine. Lying there alone, I finally saw clearly what I had been too willing to excuse for far too long. So let me say this plainly. The way I wish someone had said it to me 20 years ago. Do not wait until you are lying in a hospital bed alone to ask yourself who truly loves you. Do not confuse someone's need for your money with their need for you. And do not be so afraid of losing a relationship that you forget you were a person long before you became somebody's parent or somebody's inheritance. These are lessons from a grandpa stories kind of life, ordinary, imperfect, and hard-won. If this grandpa stories reached something in you today, leave a comment below and tell me. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if stories like this one are why you keep coming back, subscribing is the simplest way to make sure you never miss the next one. This has been One Man's Family Story, and I am grateful you stayed for all of it. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. It means more than you know. One final note. The stories I share contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and storytelling purposes. If that is not the kind of content you are looking for, there is no obligation to stay, but for those of you who are, I will see you in the next one.